Welcome back to my channel, Hiking with Mike, where every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday we go on a hike through the forest and you get to see my point of view while I tell you a story. And if you're new to the channel, I just explained what we do. However, on Wednesdays I don't tell a story. Instead, I keep my mouth quiet while you get to listen to the sights and sounds of what's around me. If you have not subscribed to the channel, be sure to do so. Just hit that big red button with those white letters right now. Just hit it, subscribe. It's so easy to do. It's so easy. It's just do it. Boom, done. And then be sure to kick that like button. We don't say smash here. Now everybody does that. We say kick or punch or attack. So if you like this video, then kick that like button. And now it's time for our story. This story takes place a long time ago, during winter. It was a cold, dark night, and this man was getting out of work. He had his big heavy jacket on to keep himself warm. Snow was falling down. And he's driving along the street, and he can barely see. The snow just seemed to be getting heavier and heavier. He was kind of getting disoriented because he couldn't really see where he was, even though he had driven these roads hundreds of times. But he kept going, hoping that something would seem familiar, that perhaps the direction he was going would lead him home. After all, he has driven these roads 1,000 times. At one point, the snow was so heavy, he simply couldn't go on. So he pulled his car over to the road, and he waited it out, hoping that that snow would lessen up a little so that he could actually see. And while he sat in his car, he shivered. Even with the jacket on. He thought about how unfortunate it would have been if he didn't bring his jacket, if he had left it home. The heat in his car didn't seem to be able to keep up with the outside temperatures. Besides, it was an old car. Kind of a piece of junk, if you asked him. The thing barely ran, and the heat barely worked. To make matters worse, ice was forming on the windshield, making it even more difficult to see. All he wanted to do was get home. He just wanted to get home. Get inside the warm house, maybe start a fire. But he knew he had a long way to go. So he sat there and he waited and waited and waited. And it was kind of quiet. The sound of the engine purring and the wind blowing against the car from every side. Finally, the snow started to let up a little, just enough where he could see a little bit ahead. So he put the car in gear and he headed off back down the road, hoping that soon he would be home. It must have been 5 minutes, but it felt like an eternity because he was driving much slower than he normally does, and he couldn't see anything around him, just a little bit of the road ahead of him. The headlights shining through the snow and the yellow line in the center of the road kind of glowing, but that's all he could see, and no car passed him. It was as if he was the only one out there. It ended up making him feel this loneliness and sadness, knowing that he was alone in life. When he would arrive home, no one would be there. Not even a dog or a cat to greet him. Just him, alone. And he thought about that as he drove along on this deserted street in the middle of a snowstorm. That he needed to change. He needed to make a big change in his life. because this wasn't working. There's nobody who would even miss him if he was to suddenly crash and disappear into a snow embankment. Nobody would even know he's gone. He also felt like he was useless. He wanted to make a difference in somebody's life, instead of just living and accomplishing nothing. So all of these thoughts were going through his head. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was the snow. Maybe it was the silence of everything. The eeriness of nobody being anywhere and not being able to see where you are that had him thinking this way. He knew he would feel better once he got home. Once he could get in front of that warm fire. So he kept going. And then suddenly he saw something. Something that made him do a double take. It was unusual. But there was a child. A child walking along the street in the darkness. Shivering, covered in snow. This child couldn't have been any more than 6 to 7 years old. He immediately stopped the car and ran out to the child and said, "Are you okay?" And the kid simply said, "I'm freezing." So the man took off his jacket and he wrapped the kid in the jacket. And he said, "This will keep you warm. Why are you out here? What happened?" And the kid said, "I'm lost. I just want to go home." So the man brought the kid to his car, and the kid sat in the front seat and he wrapped himself in the blanket, still shivering. Unfortunately, the man had no food in his car to give the child. But he asked the kid where he lived. "Hey kid, what's your name?" "Bobby." "Bobby? Bobby, where do you live?" So the kid told him his address. He goes, "Okay, I'm going to bring you back home to your mommy and daddy." And the kid's like, "Okay." He knew it would be tough. He could barely see the road signs. He was praying that the snow would just calm down a little bit, enough for him to be able to see the road so that he can get this kid home to his parents, who are probably going nuts, wondering where their son is. And especially to lose their son in a snowstorm. It would be so hard to find him. And it was as if God had answered his prayer, because the snow let up. Suddenly it was coming down very lightly. And now he could see. He could see the road signs. And so with the kid's help, he drove from street to street, going through back roads and hillsides and through farm fields and everywhere else, as the kid was guiding him to the child's home. During the car ride, the child didn't speak. He just shivered. When the man would ask him questions, the kid would say nothing. He would never answer him. He just continued to shiver and looking down the whole time. He wasn't looking out the window. He wasn't looking at the man. He just looked down at the floor. So the man pretty much felt that the child just wasn't in the mood to talk. So he stayed quiet, as long as he could get this kid home. They were now driving down this very windy country road. It was only one lane. And the snow was piled up along the sides of the road. The plow had just gone through. And you could see the snow still coming down through the headlights. And that's when the little kid pointed. And he pointed at this white house this white farmhouse on top of a hill. And he didn't say anything, he just pointed at it. And that's when the man knew that must be his home. So the man slowly pulls up to the house. He could see there's a car in the driveway, and the orange glow of the light from within. So he slowly pulls up the driveway, and he tells the child, "You just wait here. I'll go see if your mommy and daddy are home, okay?" And the kid just nodded. So he leaves the car, and he knocks on the door, and nobody answers. So he knocks a little harder. Finally, someone came to the door. And it was a woman. And she said, "Yes, can I help you?" And that's when the man said, "Yes, I think you may. I was driving home from work and I saw a child walking down the street. He didn't have a jacket on, he seemed lost. And I asked him where he lived, and he said he lives here." And she just looked at him, kind of perplexed. Didn't really say anything. And he goes, "Yeah, I have him in the car. He said his name is Bobby." And that's when the woman's eyes widened, and she turned white as a ghost. And she said, "That's impossible." And the man said, "Why?" "My son's dead." "Yeah, but the child's in the car." And he turns around, and there is no child in the car. No one's there. And he looks back to the woman and he goes, "What was your child's name?" And she goes, "Bobby. He died on this night. He ran away from home and he died in the streets. They found him frozen to death the next morning." She goes, "Are you playing some kind of joke on me? Do you think this is funny?" And the man's like, "No, I saw this child walking. He said his name was Bobby. He was freezing, so I put my jacket on him, and I asked him to show me where he lived, and this is where he brought me." And she said, "That's impossible." Perplexed, the man didn't know what else to say or do, so he simply apologized. As he walked back to his car, he looked over by the door and saw that there were no footprints in the snow. There had to have been. This kid was inside his car. Now he's not. Where are the footprints? The man was so confused. But the other thing that was unusual was that his jacket was missing. It was gone. So he knew that that kid had to have been there. That the kid had his jacket. But where did the kid go? How could he just vanish? How could his jacket just vanish? It didn't make any sense. So the man started up his car, and he drove away and headed back to where he had come from. Perplexed the entire time. He just couldn't stop thinking about it. He couldn't understand how this was possible. So he kept going. He's getting close now to home. There's a road he has to take. And this road goes up a hill, and on each side of the road are 2 cemeteries. And he passes these cemeteries every day on his way home. As he drives up the hill, his headlights shine into one of the graveyards, and the stones all seem to glow. And that's when he notices something unusual. He sees what appears to be his jacket hanging on top of a gravestone. He got freaked out. He was a little bit freaked out by that. But he pulled over anyways. And he gets out of the car and he starts walking towards that stone. And he sees his jacket upon the stone. And then he looks down. And the name on the stone was Robert. And the age was 7 years old. And the death date was exactly 1 year ago. He was dumbfounded. He had realized that the child he had found was this child. This child who had gone missing a year ago and was found frozen in the snow. But how was this all possible? How could he physically put a jacket on a ghost child? And how could his jacket end up here? It didn't make a lot of sense. He grabbed his jacket and he went home. The next morning, there was a knock at his door. He was still freaked out from the night before. He went to the door and he opened it up, and it was the child's mother. Now he's even more confused because how did she know who he was and how did she know where he lived? And so he asked her. She told him, "I found this business card of yours at my son's gravesite. It must have fallen out of your jacket. The jacket you said he was wearing." And he said, "I'm confused." She said, "After you came to me last night and told me you had found my son, I felt the most amazing peace I had felt since we lost him. You see, I have never been able to accept his death because I have always felt that he was still lost, still out there. But last night you found him, and you brought him home, and now he is with me, and I could feel him there, and he's okay. He is okay. Thank you. Thank you for finding my son." And she turned around and left. After that day, the story spread throughout the town. The man put his jacket on top of the stone, and they ended up cementing the jacket in. So the jacket is now part of the stone as a reminder to people that we go on. That even though we are not physically here, we still go on. That stone still stands today in my hometown, and that story still gets passed on from time to time. When I first heard it, I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it at all. I thought it was an urban legend. I mean, there are similar stories like that all over the country, all over the world. But then my friend took me to the stone, and there it was, the jacket, cemented to the top. After seeing that, it was hard to dispute the story of the lost ghost child found in the middle of a snowstorm. And now it's time for another shameless plug, where I plug something of mine, shamelessly. And today, it's paranormalaliens.com. It's a website that I have created that features all sorts of spooky and creepy items, things that come from outer space, things that come from the dark corners of your basement, things that come from the caves in the forest. Check out paranormalaliens.com for all sorts of really cool and creepy items that I have personally created. Do you know someone who is a big fan of horror or the paranormal, or is it to UFOs and aliens? Well, come to paranormalaliens.com and find the perfect gift item. Check it out today, paranormalaliens.com. And that was my shameless plug. Now back to the video.